freedom fighters have called on former President FW de Klerk to return the Nobel Peace Prize he won because they say he has blood on his hands. Party spokesperson Dr. Mbuyiseni Ndlozi said the de Klerk government was central to many massacres of the 90s, in particular Boipatong, as it sought to undermine a just transition to democracy. The backlash has followed de Klerk's assertions that apartheid was not a crime against humanity. He was speaking to SABC News on the 30th anniversary of the unbanning of South African liberation struggle movements and the release of political prisoners. Let's take a listen and watch.
Can we agree today with what the United Nations said about apartheid, that it was a crime against humanity and it was evil?
I don't fully agree with that. I'm not justifying apartheid in any way whatsoever.
But why can't you agree with that? Because it wreaked havoc to millions of South Africans.
It did, and I apologize for that. I profusely apologize for that. But there's a difference between calling something a crime. Like genocide is a crime. Apartheid cannot be, that's why I'm saying this, cannot be, for instance, compared with genocide. There was never genocide.
But there was a mass killing of
under
people.
Apartheid. There were many people died. Yes,
mass imprisonment of people.
But more people died because of black-on-black violence than because of apartheid.
So that was FW de Klerk speaking earlier on to my colleague Maneli Sutuba. So let's talk about this now. Dr. Marjorie Jobson is the National Director of Khulumani Support Group in our Pretoria studios, and joining us on the line is Advocate Dumisa Nzebeza, the former head of the investigative unit of the TRC. A very good evening to you both. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening.
Good evening, Teresa.
Let me start with you, Advocate Nzebeza. The former president at pains to distinguish between genocide and apartheid, saying that a genocide is a crime, but apartheid cannot be defined as such. Legally speaking, does he have any leg to stand on, so to speak?
Yeah, well, he's a denialist as far as that is concerned. Firstly, it was the United Nations that declared apartheid as a crime against humanity. And that was after several motions where, came into the General Assembly and I think also into the Security Council. So that, that is a definition of what apartheid was as a consequence of what the world had observed apartheid to be, its effects and everything else. But we must also remember that as early as the 60s, 1960s, the watershed year, that is the year when the liberation movements in South Africa decided for the first time to take up arms to end the apartheid order. OCO was formed as the military wing of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, and then Umkhondo Wesizwe as the armed wing of the African National Congress. Those were the decisive years, 1960, precisely because of untold atrocities. You will know that 1960 is known for the Sharpeville massacre and the Kwalanga massacre. And there were very many other, incidents at the, instance of the South African security forces. So for him to say he doesn't agree with the definition of apartheid as being a crime against humanity, he must tell me what is it when 67 people are mowed down, armless people, men, women and children, shot down in cold blood simply because they refused to carry a pass. You will have to tell me in the very year that we were transitioning to our new democracy, what you will call Boipatong.
So this is what I'm wondering as well. If you look at the meaning of the word genocide, it refers to the killing of a group of people based on race or religion, but it is something that is also systemic. Is this not what apartheid was?
It was. It was. I mean, it was a legalized system of governance which did not take into account, the countless sufferings that it subjected those it discriminated against. One only has to think of those areas where people who had been declared to be, surplus labor, in the sense that they had done their time and they were no longer useful on the farms and on the mines. They would be sent to the so-called homelands, the Bantustans, where they would be held virtually in camps, Dimbaza and all such places. There was a level, of unforgivable mistreatment with which black people were treated by that order.
Advocate Ntsebeza, hold the thought, because I want us to also come back to the issue of the TRC, the work that it did, its successes and failures. But let's then talk about that with the Khulumani support group, because they're very much involved with those who are part of the process. Dr. Jobson, I want to come to you on this particular issue. FW de Klerk himself was found to not have made full disclosure. In fact, at one point, one of the commissioners of the TRC said because that he admitted that he spared his role and that of his colleagues in the mass killing of black people, that he should face sanction. Did the TRC fail in holding him to account?
Tsebiso, to go back to your initial question about the crime against humanity, the truth is that an independent forum defined apartheid as a crime against humanity, and it became part of the founding statements of the International Criminal Court. So I don't think that's in dispute. The difficulty was that when the TRC was set up, the TRC agreed that all the statutes that had functioned under apartheid, even though they were based on extraordinarily discriminatory and harmful laws, all of them would not be counted as a crime. So that was where the gap happened. The TRC didn't have the power to enforce the international agreement that apartheid was a crime against humanity. And what's really interesting is that a new archive has just emerged. We have always told that there were only 67 victims killed at Sharpeville. In fact, the apartheid government itself did very detailed documentation of over 400 victims of the Sharpeville massacre. Not all of them deaths, but many of them very serious injuries, which people are still contending with today. So, I mean, the truth has not been told. The fact is that TRC could only give judgments about the most serious of the gross human rights violations, like assassinations, rape, murder, prolonged detention. So the number of people who actually got covered by the TRC was very limited by the mandate of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and yet we still haven't done justice to those people. So one of the comments that FW de Klerk made at one stage was that his fear in handing over power, which was going to be inevitable, was that handing power to the black people would mean that white people wouldn't have the justice to which they were entitled. And I think that still is the fundamental issue we deal with around the fears of white people even today, that we are all human beings of equal value. Apartheid did terrible things to everybody in this country.
Allow me to jump in and ask you this question. When you say, obviously when you're speaking about his fears of FW de Klerk and speak about the justice to which white people were entitled, to what exactly is this in reference to Archbishop Desmond Tutu when he handed over the final as his final act as chairman of the TRC, one of the things that he did do was question white South Africans, was question big business about their role in apartheid and how much they carried responsibility, recognized the responsibility that they ought to carry for the fact that it was a system that was there, that was acknowledged, that was sanctioned, and many people living with it without even batting an eyelid.
Exactly, Tsepiso. I mean, one of our arguments in the international lawsuit was that apartheid was basically a criminal enterprise, and we couldn't win that because actually the TRC itself had not accepted that the definition of the crime of apartheid. So we also think that there is so much, when I listen to former President de Klerk speaking, I can hear that he has not truly connected with the damage that apartheid did to the majority of people in this country, damage that has not yet been repaired, damage for which we formed a global task team now because our motto is justice is the same for everyone, not a separate justice for white and black people. So, and the other problem we are really aware of is in one of the last hearings of the TRC, former President de Klerk said that he had never authorized or presided over any meetings where he authorized the murder of activists. And in fact, we have seen minutes of the State Security Council over which he presided, in which he gave permission for the extermination of certain very prominent political activists. So these are the things where there are gaps in the acknowledgement of the extent to which he was actually complicit, and how the state and under him has still failed to actually make redress. There is so much that we could still do, but largely the Afrikaner community has been holding back on engaging and making opportunities for the employment and skills training of black people. So I'm sad that he hasn't reached that point. I'm glad he believes in constitutional rights, but I do note that he always hung on to the concept of minority rights as a protection, and I don't think we need a country where there are minority and majority rights at all.
And Africans, just you and the role that you played at the time, when the TRC in 1998 was forced to dilute its findings, as in they could have come up with a harsher findings, I understand, especially against the former President FW de Klerk, did you feel that it was a failure for those who had lived under apartheid, who were victims of apartheid? And of course, this is going to be a generational stain, so to speak.
Well, I mean, look, it's difficult, for me to find in what way we did not deal with the de Klerk legacy in the way in which we should have done so. We found against him for several atrocities that took place, as much as under his watch. I mean, I can never forget, for instance, just to digress a little bit, how, he was hard-placed to explain the murder, because I call it by what its name is, the murder of young people in Tata in a raid in Northcrest, which he was compelled to admit was a mission that was authorized by him on the basis that it was a so-called Azanian People's Liberation Army, hideout. He personally ordered the raid into Northcrest, where young people, 14 years old, were killed in their sleep. And what do you call that? And has he ever said, look, I acknowledge that that was the wrong order? I have never heard him say he did that. Now, when, you are a commander-in-chief of the security forces of a country and you order that these people must go out and raid a home in a township and kids die, the least that one would have expected was for de Klerk to have owned up to that dastardly killing of young people. But he never did. Because for every so-called apology that he made, like now, in the clip that you played, you would see that there is a qualification, you know.
And while I hear and understand what you're saying, that you can't judge yourself as being part of the TRC process, as in yourselves, as in the whole process itself, but it is important to address it. There's been a great deal of frustrations with the TRC, what many people see as having failed to get us justice. One of the things that Archbishop Tutu himself raised was the issue of reparations. Why has that...
No, so, you know, a lot of blame is put on the TRC. The TRC was, it was an impossible task. We were expected to investigate 34 years of South African history between 1960 and 1994 to come out with all the gross violations of human rights, etc., and to expose them so that we could have as clear a picture as possible of what happened by all violations of human rights in that period of time. Anyone would be hard-pressed to find that there was enough time for us to have done the thorough research. But we did. What I say the people of South Africa begin to lose sight of is that we made recommendations. And those recommendations were never followed through by the post-apartheid democratic government of South Africa from 1998. We had even made recommendations for reparations. Much will tell you the extent to which we went in trying to get the government to stand by at least the recommendations that we made. For instance, we made a recommendation that, people must be compensated to the tune of about, say...
Absolutely. And Advocate Nsabesa, I think this is the question that I was asking. Why do you think it failed? Dr. Jobson, what is your point of view? A failed transition project is what many people have called South Africa a point. And if you just look at why we're here, stepping back to when Mr. de Klerk made the announcement, others said it was just a last-ditch attempt by FW de Klerk and the Nationalist Party to hold or retain some slice of power. So there was no genuine effort, really.
Tsipiso, I think what is going on here is not different from most of the rest of the world. I was this weekend with victims from South America, and it has taken them 40 years to get the police officers and the political leaders who were responsible for setting fire to the Spanish embassy, killing 37 people, finally convicted. So it is not unusual for it to take the 38 years that it's taken for the Neil Agate inquest to be reopened. But the key issue about reparations is that, unfortunately, it seems that all over the world it is stigmatized. In South Africa, it is more important than most other parts of the world because of the economic inequality that was race-based in this country, and that people have never had the harms done to them redressed. So for us it is even more important than in many other parts of the world.
Dr. Jobson, you mentioned earlier on that part of our approach in terms of post-apartheid South Africa and the transition was that we, all blacks and whites, were looking at it as a process where we're all people. And some people have said that therein lies the problem. The issue of the original sin was not dealt with enough. What is your point of view on that?
I agree with you completely, Tsepiso. I mean, this is what Peter Blanche spent a lot of time trying to explain. And until we adopt the policies that will redress that economic inequality that has perpetuated over subsequent generations, we are not going to make progress in this country. It has terrible transgenerational impacts of increasing marginalization of people. And so justice will be justice for the victims who were at the forefront of those struggles in the townships.
Right,
largely.
so just before we go, Advocate Nzebeza, let me ask you this question. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. But your reaction, your response to what the EFF is saying, that FW de Klerk needs to give back his Nobel Peace Prize. What's your point of view on this?
What do the EFF say?
They're saying that he needs to return the Nobel Peace Prize, that he himself has blood on his hands, that he was no peacemaker. What is your thought on this? Fair comment?
Well, it has taken them quite some time for them to come up with a suggestion. But, I mean, for what it is something that one must think about. What I think about it is actually contained in a book which I authored with Terry Bell. The title of the book is called Unfinished Business. And in the very first chapter, first 10 pages, we decry the fact that Nobel Peace Prize could be given to de Klerk. And you will know that I was still grieving from what they had done to those kids in North Crest.
All right, thank you very much.
Represented as a lawyer.
And thank you very much to you both for speaking. It was Dr. Marjorie Jobson, National Director, Kulumani Support Group in our Pretoria studios. On the line with us, there was Advocate Dumisa Nzebeza, who is the former head of investigative unit of the TRC. Thank you so much to you both. Now, a reminder of our question of the day. It's about this, apartheid being declared a crime against humanity by the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. What do you feel about the prosecution of apartheid perpetrators? We've just had a conversation about who should be held to account and why this was never done. Here's some of your thoughts.
It doesn't help at all to duke the past. Really, it doesn't help. We have a lot to do now. Let us just focus on the present and forget about the past. That's what Mandela do. I think that's what we should do as well.
All right, so Pule writes on Twitter that they are literally scot-free, enjoying their lives as if nothing happened. For the past 26 years, all we've been doing is talking, but no efforts for a true and just reconciliation in benefit of the country's legacy. Freddie saying you can never build with those who don't share similar vision and, more importantly, not interested in working, being associated with you. Prosecution is not living in the past, however, ensuring weeding out of negative elements. And we've got another one from Simon saying it's too late to declare apartheid as a crime against humanity. The government should be dealing with racism, drugs and corruption that has been wrought within us as citizens. And you can have your say on this. Send us your voice notes, video call us. Here's the number, +2766 479 8056. You can view any of our interviews or features by going to sabcnews.com. We're also available on Facebook and Twitter. And now let's hand you over to